I have the honor of sitting down with the Michael Knowles, fresh from Nashville today, to have a conversation. We're just grateful for your time, Michael. And just, I got to say, when we released our first round of speakers for this event, and there was excitement. But the second we both posted Michael Knowles on the flyer, that's when.
All right.
So
that's what I was predicting. That's what I said. All you got to do, put my face on there. Well, I'm glad to hear it actually worked. I would have been upset if you said that you put my face on the flyer and then people dropped out. That would have been disappointing.
That would be bad news. But no, I guess you're known as a Catholic in the cultural fight. So we'll talk about their Catholic faith. Always been Catholic?
I was a cradle Catholic. By the time I was confirmed at 13, I would have called myself an atheist. Didn't really want to be confirmed. And my mother wisely said, Michael, you're going through a phase. You have taken your religion seriously, basically up until now. You shouldn't throw it all out. You should receive the sacrament, and you're going to snap out of it and stop acting like a dummy at some point. And she was probably a little off on the timing, because the timing took about 10 years. But she was right, ultimately, because at that time, this would have been around 2003, the New Atheists were popular in publishing. I don't know how intellectually serious they were, but they were a big fad. And that was very persuasive to a 13-year-old who thought he was smarter than he was, which is probably most 13-year-old boys. To say nothing of, obviously the scandals within the church. And then the problem of catechesis, which is that following the Second Vatican Council, there were some unfortunate implementations of liturgical and
experiments,
pedagogical innovations, and they were not conducive to filling the pews with young men. Let's put it that way. And then ultimately it was, my hubris, my pride as a 13-year-old boy in a secular culture. I just thought I was cleverer than St. Thomas Aquinas. Though I chose for my confirmation saint, St. Thomas.
Did you?
In retrospect, I can't remember if it was Thomas the Apostle or St. Thomas Aquinas, which it doesn't really matter, I think, because Thomas means twin. So I kind of I claim both of them, yeah. But it was because of Thomas being the doubter. I thought that was, represented my feeling at the time. And also because I had at least heard of St. Thomas Aquinas and was told that he was rather reasonable and intelligent, and I thought, little did I know how much so. So anyway, I was away from the church for 10 years. Starting around 18, my college roommate, who was a cradle Catholic, didn't receive his confirmation. The family became kind of megachurch Protestants. He was sort of agnostic at this point. He introduced me to the ontological argument for God, first formulated by St. Anselm of Canterbury. The version that he showed to me was from a Calvinist philosopher, Alvin Plantinga, at Notre Dame, a Catholic college, kind of an odd coincidence. Anyway, it convinced me, though it did not convince St. Thomas Aquinas, that there was a strong argument for the existence of God. St. Thomas obviously had many other arguments. I believed God existed. I wasn't certain about religion. So then I read C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, some others. Finally got around to reading the Bible and was persuaded that Jesus is who he says he is. And then I thought, maybe I ought to go to Mass. And so I started going to Mass. Didn't really have a sense of what the traditional Mass was because it had been kept from us for so long, for some reason. But by the time I reverted, this was after the motu proprio, from Pope Benedict. So I discovered these traditional liturgical elements, and then I discovered the traditional Latin Mass. That was pretty big. And then where it all kind of culminated, to make a short story long, was I was at a meeting of conservatives in the entertainment industry in New York, and they were giving away books, and kind of typical right-wing talking head books. I won't embarrass any of the authors, but I thought, I'm not interested. I see a little book there. Looks interesting. And the epigraph on it, the title was coincidentally, the epigraph was, all nature is but art unknown to thee, all chance, direction, which thou canst not see, which is a line from Alexander Pope. I see who it's by. It's by a fellow named George W. Rutler. Turn it over. I see the first blurb is from William F. Buckley Jr. I was one of the inaugural Buckley Fellows when I was in college. I thought that's kind of interesting. Buckley said something to the effect of, save this as a valuable Rutler first edition. I open it up. I see it's a signed copy. I look at the back. I see he's a priest. I see he's a priest in New York. I look further. I see he's a priest 2 blocks away.
No
So
way.
that's a little interesting. Then I find out later, I was really blown away by this coincidence. I find out he had left the church a couple blocks from where I had been standing. He was moved to a church in Hell's Kitchen called St. Michael's. I show up, there's a nice little mosaic on the steps. It says, "The truth above all things." And I actually caught Father Rutler's eye. I obviously didn't know him at this point. Just kind of looked at me. He gets ready to process down. And that pretty much did it.
No kidding. How old were you then?
Would have been probably 23,
23?
23, 24, around there, yeah.
And you got involved. How were you just outward with your faith right away? Because in terms of your business career. So when you started, was it known? Did you go off that?
Yeah, you're a cradle Catholic.
Yeah.
So the reverts have the zeal of a convert, but you don't know what to do with it. Converts are really annoying in that way. You just discovered this truth.
What do you do?
You say, I got to tell everybody, and so it takes a little while to get used to it.
Get paced.
Right. At the time, I guess basically I've always worked in politics and show business, sometimes in separate ways, sometimes together. Obviously now I do a political show. At the time I was working in, I guess you'd call it mainstream show business, plays and films and things. But I also, from the time I was a teenager, I had a political consulting shop because I had worked early on in 19 years old, I guess, on my first political campaign. It was successful. I had a decent role in that campaign. I ended up getting hired by other campaigns. And so I was simultaneously doing politics and show business. And a religious turning, does make you reconsider things. Makes you reconsider the kinds of material that you're performing in, if you're in show business. Makes you consider the kind of campaigns that you're working on, the kind of platforms that you're promoting in politics. And then I ended up in LA, just doing little movies and things like that, still running some of the campaigns. And the man who was running the conservative showbiz group at the time, called Friends of Abe, a society so secret it had a Wikipedia page, that man was Jeremy Boring, who took over after Gary Sinise. And so I had met Jeremy in New York. I knew Andrew Clavin because I was friends with his son in college. I directed him in opera and things like that.
Crazy.
And then Ben was one of the first people I met in LA. I had a dinner at Drew's house with Ben and another friend of ours and the wives. And then they told me they were starting this company and pretty quickly offered me a job. And I kind of told Jeremy, I said, man, we're in show business. I didn't come here to have a real job. I came here to do all these kind of crazy things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he said, you dummy, let me give you health insurance. What's the matter with you? But I was still doing films. I wrapped principal photography on a movie on Election Day, 2016. Went straight from the set to Daily Wire for the coverage. And then was working there a bit, published a blank book as a joke called Reasons to Vote for Democrats. It became a hit, and then I got a show. I might be the only guy in history who ever got a show for not writing a book.
Just like that. That's not a bad start. Okay, so you are a politics guy, and you're Catholic. So here's the question.
Yeah.
The phrase is out there. It's based off a book, Catholic Republic.
Yes, by a friend of mine.
Yes.
Yeah.
That we are wired Catholic, labeled Protestant, functioning secular. What do you think about that? Are we wired Catholic, and that basically means that you articulate better than anyone that our natural law can only come from Catholic sources?
Ultimately, yeah, because the Church built and the whole civilization. I suppose our Lord and the faith animate the civilization, but the Church is the real visible expression of that, and had even a political lock on Christendom until at least the 16th century. So it's just even if one is not Catholic, it's just an historical fact. That's what kind of built up the civilization. And so Tim Gordon, who wrote that book, is a friend of mine. Love the guy because he's quite perspicacious, insightful guy, but he talks like a surfer dude. Yeah, so I call him the dude bro philosopher, but he's really sharp. And what he is observing when he says that America, which we of course always think of as Protestant, I mean, my puritanical ancestors came over on the Mayflower. I've got certainly a strong Protestant line on my father's side. They would be rolling in their graves to hear that America is a Catholic country. But when we say it's a Catholic country, we just mean implicitly. frankly, if you even look at the structure of the American government and then read St. Thomas Aquinas describing the ideal government in the Summa, you'll be reading more or less the same thing. What does St. Thomas Aquinas say is the ideal government? He says it's a monarchy. We're not exactly a monarchy, but neither is his version. It's a monarchy with a strong aristocratic element, with a strong democratic element, a representation for the people. And it seems quite clear, whether the framers of the Constitution were directly reading St. Thomas or whether they were just reading him mediated through the intervening philosophers, it seems quite clear that that sense of the breadth of the government and the balance of various interests obviously makes it into our country, largely grounded on natural law. And then you see that observation made by probably the greatest commenter on American politics ever, Alexis de Tocqueville, who writes in Democracy in America that, sure, I guess it's a Protestant country, but ideas have some momentum. And so when the ideas play out, America is either going to end up Catholic or it's going to give up religion altogether, which is a part of Democracy in America that people don't talk about very much. I guess it's not very popular, but Tocqueville was right about a whole lot of things, and he might be right about that too.
Absolutely agree. And taking that further, that thought, so you're a traditional Catholic, many great, thinkers in that traditional world would say that the best kind of government or country is a confessional state. Now, we don't really have a confessional state here in America. We have a little bit different. It's like it lays the groundwork for a conversation and for an invitation to conversion. What do you think about that? Is a confessional state better? Where it's Catholic, everyone's Corpus Christi off, all that kind of stuff, right?
It's kind of funny to think about the comparison too from the country that we broke away from, which is England, which has an established church, and the monarch is theoretically the head of it, cuius regio, eius religio, and yet nobody goes, and nobody really believes a thing in the UK. Here we don't have an established national church, and relatively we are religious. We're more religious than others in the West. The relation of the church to the state is I think even more complex than the integralists, some of the integralists would have you believe. It's certainly more complex than the liberals would have you believe. And there's even a beautifully interesting debate that occurs within the church, in church history. I love Dante. Dante's kind of my main man. Dante, in his minor work, Monarchy, seems to contradict Pope Boniface VIII, which is no surprise because he puts Boniface VIII in hell when he's writing the Divine Comedy. But in Monarchy, he contradicts the papal bull Unam Sanctam. In that papal bull, Boniface VIII argues that the terrestrial power must be subordinate to the ecclesiastical power. He's a hierocrat. And his argument for this comes from Genesis, which is that you've got the two powers, the sun and the moon. And the sun has its own power. The moon merely reflects the sun. This also comes from Boniface's claim, owing to the image in the New Testament of the two swords, that the papacy controls both spiritual and terrestrial power. To make this even more complex, in the medieval Florentine politics, there are two parties, the Guelphs, who are pro-pope, and the Ghibellines, who are pro-emperor. Dante is a Guelph, but he fights at the Battle of Campaldino, I think it was. They do great. They go back. The Guelphs split up between the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs. Okay. So you got the white Guelphs who they're like the rhinos of their day. They're in the pro-papal party, but they're kind of pro-emperor. And then you've got the black Guelphs who end up running Dante out of town, take all of his possessions, threaten to kill him, and he dies in exile in Ravenna. Why do I recount that long theory of medieval Florentine politics? Because Dante says that the empire is a natural institution, that both the emperor and the church and the pope derive their power directly from God. The empire, in fact, predates the church, right? Our Lord is born in the fullness of time meaning the empire under Caesar Augustus when Rome had conquered the whole world. So, does that mean that the liberals are right? We've said the hierocrats are wrong. Does that mean that the liberals are right? It certainly doesn't mean that the liberals are right. Dante is quite clear. The state stands to benefit immensely from the light of the church. So in that sense, a confessional state or a greater integration of the church and the state is a great thing to be sought. But it is not, as I think some of the liberals fear, to say that we're, going to have the Pope, managing the toll roads or something.
Right.
That's probably not going to work. This view, though, is so beautiful. And I saw it, Taylor Marshall the other day made a great point. He said, people are so afraid of a greater integration of the church and the state. By which we mean, by the way, we're not talking, a theocracy is when the clerics are running the toll roads. We're just talking about the government, which has to base its law on some kind of morality, basing it on the true morality, the morality that built our civilization. But he said, we're so concerned about that. We're not concerned about the integration of the banks and the state. Those are pretty tightly entwined.
Spot on with that point.
Why not the church?
Yeah.
So that, I think, is greatly to be pursued, because we're gonna worship someone or something. We're gonna have a moral order recognized by the state.
Mm-hmm.
It's either going to be, the alphabet soup and the sacrament of abortion, according to liberalism, or it's going to be the true morality. And I think we would probably flourish much better if we lived according to the true moral order and the true creator of that moral order.
I think what you hit on, I mean, if I had to summarize that extremely well set position, it's almost like it's fides and ratio. It's like the state represents reason, and it's always complemented by faith, but neither can usurp each other's. They each have their other two wings. We fly to God, right, Benedict? So
and they certainly stand to benefit one from the other. The church even stands to benefit from a stable state. You can't have, the flourishing of a visible incarnational faith such as ours if you're living in Mad Max or something, right? Order is a good thing, and the civil authority does not bear the sword in vain. But we've got to recognize that the three societies that man is born into, I think it was Pope Pius XI says this, right? We're born into the family, the civil order, the state, and the church. And they have different rights. They have different responsibilities. The family and the civil order pursue man's natural ends, the church, the supernatural ends. But they can work together in a beautiful harmony, or they can be severed and discordant, and then we have a tough life.
I could have a very long conversation with you. These are excellent topics, but extremely important too for the conversation too. Like that we're Catholic in our roots, but shifting over to the more practical.
Yeah.
So we're both Catholics. I deal in the political cultural space. We organize events, Rosary rallies, things like that. We often run across sometimes speakers who Catholic. They're phenomenal people. They want to speak at events like this, Catholic Prayer for Trump in Mar-a-Lago. They want to. They're dying to. And then what happens is that they understand that if they come and speak here, they're not canceled by the secular world.
Yeah.
They're canceled by many times, indirectly or directly by it's the church, right? So, I actually, had a conversation with a few of these people last few weeks, and we're talking about this event because more wanted to come in, and they were saying, well, we're not going to be able to reach as many people if we come to this event that we're canceled. You know what I said? I said 2 words, Michael Knowles. And I said, because you're breaking the mold a little bit. You're fully Catholic. You work for a Jewish man, a wonderful, right, and a Daily Wire company, right?
Run by Protestants.
Right,
owned, and Ben's a sort of minority owner. But right, you got an Orthodox Jew, multiple Protestants, and yet they only seem to hire Catholics.
Yeah.
Go make sense of that.
But it is, but it's like, it's almost like the model is shifted, and I think it's important to know, because, again, history of the church, like, we get it. Not every bishop is a saint, not every lay person is a saint. So some of the bishops may need to be more bold, we get it, right? But we don't want that to be a stranglehold on our people and the voice of truth. And I think you've really found a way to do that, work in the secular world, but be fully bold. And I think it has a lot to do with what we just talked about earlier, about being the faith and reason. So
it's funny you mentioned that about the bishops, because there were some wonderful, heroic bishops out there, including in America, doing great work. But when I did my blank book years ago, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, I gave a copy to a priest friend of mine. And he said, Michael, this is a really good book. I think I'm going to do my own version of it called The Wisdom of the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. And I'm sure he was being hyperbolic and painting with a broad brush, but it is unfortunate when the bishops don't want to proclaim the truth clearly And so, in part, I've heard from priests, if not prelates, that sometimes they feel caged in or limited to some degree by the laity, to say nothing of the, Rome. So there's also a way in which we need to be able to encourage the bishops and to say, look, you're going to, if a bishop permits ad orientem liturgy, no, I'm not even saying the TLM, I'm talking about just ad orientem in the Novus Ordo, and Susan from the parish council or whoever starts yelling at the bishop and threatening to write into Rome, it's going to greatly circumscribe what the bishop is able to accomplish. So it's also incumbent upon the laity, but I sympathize with some of these speakers who say, well, look, I have a very particular career. Whereas for me, I speak to lunatic left-wing students in secular colleges, and so I can't be canceled in that way. There are plenty of other ways I'm sure I could be canceled, but for people who say, look, my career, and even beyond any kind of financial concern, just what I do, what I feel to be my calling, is dependent upon the bishops not canceling me, they're going to be more limited, and maybe what they're doing is maybe they are exactly where they ought to be, but then we also ought to, one hopes, address the problem of bishops who don't 100%. Want to boldly proclaim the truth.
100%. One last question.
Yeah.
President Trump. There are two options here. President Trump does not perfectly align with Catholics in every single iota of Catholic teaching. Some of it's important, but yet he's the best option. Would you agree, and why?
So certainly, there's no question about that. It's kind of ironic, I guess, because we have our second nominally Catholic president now, Joe Biden. But it's not merely that he ignores or goes weak on certain Catholic teaching. It's that he actively undermines really basic aspects of the Catholic political
President
vision.
Biden.
Yeah. Whereas Trump is apparently a lapsed Presbyterian, and yet he's done a far better job. As you say, not exactly perfect, though on some of the issues where President Trump has seemed to contradict Catholic teaching, I wonder if in part it's just because some of these issues are novel. They involve technology and bioethical issues that are somewhat novel. And so the man has been relatively so good so far, not even just compared to Biden, but compared to any president in my lifetime. I think, well, look, this is a man who seems to have a good gut, even if occasionally he gets this issue wrong or that issue wrong. And ultimately, these elections are binary choices. So who are we going to vote for? I just can't think of any issue, even an issue where I might think President Trump's view is not perfect. Well, on those issues, Biden is even worse, even more contrary to not only the faith, but even just broadly our political flourishing. So some elections are a little trickier than others. This does not appear to be one of them.
Absolutely. And that's why we're doing a Catholic prayer for Trump tonight. So it's great to have you, Michael, at this event. Is it true that you're a rosary guy?
I am what does that mean? I just pray the rosary a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the rosary. Yeah.
Apparently you have the same rosary.
Yes. Mine is in my briefcase right now. Is this from Father Kunkel?
This is the Father.
Yes. So I was in Scottsdale, and I was out one day, and I think I was having a drink at the Rusty Spur Saloon, which is a kind of a funny place to look across the street and see a sacred art gallery. So my wife and I go over, we see this beautiful art, and I see these rosaries, really nice rosaries, and they're in a toolbox, selling because this is a tool, it's a spiritual tool. And I find out they're made by a local priest. I say, all right, get me one. I go back, it's a great rosary. I order one for my friend, I give it to my friend. And but now, I show up. I was just down at Mass here, and multiple people said, Michael, where's your Father Kunkel rosary? I've got my Father Kunkel rosary right here. Very impressive.
So shout out to Father Kunkel. He's a great priest and does some great rosaries in his free time. So, Michael, thank you for your time, and we're looking forward to working with you not only for this event, but in the future.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to it.